Hey everybody, really excited to have you here as part of this training, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you IRL, but I do think the information that I'm going to present to you today will be useful for many different public health professionals as well as practitioners who are trying to understand and assess the impact of medical misinformation and how you might challenge what's going on, not just on social media, but with a few other key strategies for coordinating with other groups who can help you move the messaging on medical misinformation. We know that right now, our social media environment, our media environment is suffering not just from a deluge of misinformation brought about by people who are either misinformed or intentionally trying to seed bad information into our information ecosystem, but also that kind of those kinds of posts are circulating alongside public health messaging, health guidelines, accurate health information, up to the minute statistics on what's happening in the world. And that confusion is what's leading to what the WHO has called an infodemic. So it's both accurate and inaccurate information being circulated. I am Joan Donovan, the research director at Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. And I lead a very interesting and diverse team of researchers who study media manipulation and disinformation campaigns. And so I'd like to start by defining some of these key terms. So I put this little comic over here because I think it's indicative of what we really understand as a relational problem on the internet. It says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And this is an old cartoon, but it still, for us, makes a lot of sense in the sense that when you go online, you don't always know who is the source of information. You don't always know where information's coming from, especially with manipulation tactics that involve spoofing URLs or making it seem like your website is a news website when it's really just click farm or clickbait. We've entered into this situation where there aren't a lot of signals online that help people understand who is acting in good faith and who is potentially running a grift or a scam, or even in the case of anti-vaccination activists, are trying to actively get people to refuse different kinds of medical treatment. So our team splits media manipulation into two different definitions. Media is an artifact of communication that can be a post, it can be a video, it can be a movie, it can be a textbook, anything that is the leave behinds of communication. And then we think a lot about manipulation. What is at play here that is making it seem like this piece of media is more important than it really is? And so we use the definition of to change by artful or unfair means so as to serve one's purpose. And that leaves open a room for us to even look at kinds of pranks and hoaxes that um, maybe use manipulation as a means to open up critical thinking or as a means to open up dialogue. Um, Usually when someone is using media manipulation or hoaxing as a activist strategy, it's to call attention to some serious problem, particularly using the features of our media ecosystem to accomplish that. Uh, it, it features like anonymity, or features like being able to pose as an imposter of an organization. I'm sure you have seen different organizations and hospitals also get impersonated in the moment of the infodemic, where we're not even sure who's sowing the chaos. Which gets us to our third definition here: disinformation, the creation and distribution of intentionally false information for political ends. And we set the bar pretty high for labeling something a disinformation campaign. We want to be able to look at, well, where was that campaign planned? What were the intentions? What were the stated goals? And did they achieve them? And so today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the documentary called The Plandemic and how we assessed its strategic goals as a disinformation campaign. Before I get to that, I just want to let you know that the research that we do at on my team is open access and freely available to anybody through mediamanipulation.org, where we have a casebook, which is a digital research platform linking together theory, methods, and practice for mapping media manipulation and disinformation campaigns. This resource is intended for researchers, journalists, technologists, policymakers, educators, and civil society organizers who want to learn about detecting, documenting, describing, and debunking misinformation. So all of the information that I'm going to present to you today is available on the casebook, as well as a set of methods and frameworks for understanding media manipulation, in particular, what we call the media manipulation life cycle. So when we spot a media manipulation campaign in action, we try to assess immediately what stage is it in. Is it somewhere where we've discovered a bunch of people starting to talk about, saying things like, wouldn't it be great if everybody, thought the upcoming vaccine had a microchip in it? It's not always as plain spoke as that, but it is important to understand that these campaigns do tend to start from the spark of a conversation. It might not be that important, though, that we know where the origins are. And so stage one is something that very rare that we catch a campaign in stage one, because there's always going to be so much conjecture online of, especially when people are talking about, wouldn't it be great if the public understood this? Very rarely do we take that kind of talk seriously. However, from our vantage point, when we're looking at certain kinds of media manipulators, especially people who've habitually done media manipulation campaigns, when they start chattering about what they think the world needs to know, we pay very close attention. Secondly, we look at, is the campaign starting to move across social platforms and web? So is it the case that there's been some conversation about a potential conspiracy theory and whatnot, and then we start to see it showing up in other places? Specifically, do we see people making YouTube videos about it? Do we see people writing blogs about it? Do we see it starting to show up in social media replies in different places? And the third place we look, and this is usually where we find media manipulation campaigns. So we can go back and trace stages 1 and 2 as research, but generally it's usually when someone of newsworthy credibility responds to or amplifies a disinformation campaign that it starts to gain traction, especially if it's a journalist who has a very general audience, calls attention to a very specific issue. We then start to see that either conspiracy or medical misinformation really start to gain traction. Celebrities too have been important components of us trying to understand the life cycle of medical misinformation campaigns. And we have an article on our website called Canaries in the Coal Mine about how COVID-19 misinformation was targeting Black communities. And one of the case studies in there really points to Instagram influencers and celebrities within the Black community pushing a conspiracy theory about COVID-19. The fourth stage is something that we look out for very closely, which is what kind of actions are being taken. Is it the case that journalists are writing debunks? Is it the case that platform companies are taking down content? Is it the case that law enforcement are conducting an investigation into certain kinds of media manipulation, especially if it exacerbates public health crises. So we look at all of these different kinds of mitigation strategies that can take place. Usually, though, what we see most often happen is that platform companies will either ban the user or remove the content or label the content. Or in the case of Facebook, for instance, they might put a fact check on the content. We have also seen attempts to get around and evade those kinds of bans or those kinds of fact checks. Particularly, there was a campaign that came about that was trying to plant medical misinformation on Medium, and Medium took action. So Medium took it down. But then that same post was being reshared using the Internet Archive, which basically the Internet Archive at archive.org will take a screenshot of web pages when they go live, and then they will stay on the Internet Archive. And so an adaptation that we saw to having content removed on Medium was that the manipulators then just started to share the link from the Internet Archive to circumvent any kind of fact checking or labels that had been put on the original content from platform companies. And those kinds of adjustments are important in the sense that certain kinds of media manipulators, particularly in the realm of medical misinformation, are highly motivated to continue with the campaign, no matter what kind of mitigation strategy is attempted. And so, as you're thinking about how do you message either around or about misinformation based on your own professional position, also think about, well, who could be your ally in some of these different stages? When it comes to manipulation campaign planning, maybe you set up a monitoring strategy and you say, we've seen this person or this URL or this website involved a few other times in medical misinformation. Let's just make sure we watch what they do. At stage 2 as well, is it the case that you ask other civil society organizations to join you in monitoring or making sense of a specific kind of theme that's starting to emerge around misinformation? Some of them we already know is going to happen. Misinformation campaigns about the COVID vaccine, as well as misinformation campaigns about 5G related to the transmission of COVID-19. So we already know that some of these campaigns are already pre-seeded online. In stage 3, it might be important that we do a little training and we let our local officials and others know that by responding to misinformation and rumors, you might actually be doing serious damage. You might actually be making it a story when it's not. And so it's very important that the people who are trusted messengers in your networks understand that it's not as simple as just saying, oh, this rumor is wrong, that your messaging strategy has to be comprehensive and has to be clear if you choose to say anything at all. And that's one of the bigger questions of this field, is essentially how many people need to be talking about something before we consider debunking it or a different kind of narrative strategy. In stage 4, if you already have content online that is problematic, potentially contacting platform companies and letting them know, or by flagging it, or having your people in your, if you're a civil society, public health agency, letting people know to flag this content might also be a useful winning strategy. And then when it comes to the adjustments, you have to think about who your allies are going to be when you start to see campaigns react to you essentially winning. It's an unfortunate situation that if your messaging does start to win or does start to take over or successfully gets medical misinformation moved off of some of these platforms, that generally speaking, there will be a kind of adaptation that happens. The other thing that's available on our website are featured definitions for different kinds of media manipulation tactics. And so I suggest that you go through at mediamanipulation.org and take a look at the different tactics and the write ups on them so that you get a sense of, well, what is within the arena of possibility related to the way in which we might see medical misinformation show up. So, one tactic we've seen time and time again is just squatting in keywords. We saw a lot of grifts and scams and hoaxes at the beginning of the pandemic, especially around people searching for N95 masks or searching for where to get a COVID test. They were being bombarded with either fake products or forms to fill out where they thought they were filling out a form for unemployment, and what they were getting was actually their identity stolen. So it's really important to understand what the landscape is around the keywords that people are using in your area to get information, and to see if any of those keywords are leading to medical misinformation or scams. Another thing is the way in which media gets recontextualized. So, evidence, we've started to see what we call the true costs of misinformation take hold in hospitals, where some people are starting to show up in hospitals to get video in order to say the pandemic is not as bad as we thought it was. The media is telling us that the hospitals are overrun, and here I am and outside of a hospital, and it looks like a normal day, right? So things that are banal, or pictures that are banal, the way they circulate online usually has to do with ginning up outrage, scandal, confusion. And so we often looked for media that is being recontextualized. Is the video that's being shared actually evidence of what the user claims it's evidence of? And that's going to grow in importance as we start to see the vaccine rollout happen, because people are going to be taking videos at pharmacies or other kinds of vaccine, clinics where people are getting either tested or getting the vaccine. We've already seen this happen numerous times, but it's really important that you understand that any piece of this kind of ephemera or this media that gets put up online may end up becoming evidence of something else for a broad conspiracy. And so you want to be attuned to the fact that this is a tactic of recontextualizing video and media. Another thing we commonly see with scientific data is fake graphics, or what we call misinfographics. Fake data, fake claims, especially claims that the coronavirus isn't that bad, or graphs, at least in the US, that show that the testing has increased and therefore diagnosis has increased. That's a big popular political argument. But also, people are dying, and there is serious problems with leadership that haven't really taking the pandemic as seriously as it needs to be. But online, the way that this rationale shows up is with misinfographics, or graphics that purport to be reporting the facts when they're not. Another way we see misinfographics show up is through the use of branding and logos of agencies. And so if you're running an agency, you want to make sure that everything that's circulating with your branding on it is from your agency and hasn't been reappropriated by one of these nefarious bad actors. We've seen different campaigns that impersonate, of course, the WHO, the CDC, and they're trying to get people to buy into messaging. Another way we see that happening too is with the use of university names and affiliations. And so try to be really skeptical if the evidence that you're looking at is if the only reason why you believe it is because it has a logo, try to confirm it other places before you share it. And then Do let other agencies know if you find misinfographics that bear their logo when you don't find their primary social media also sharing this. And so I understand this all sounds pretty scary and overwhelming. And so I want to also help you understand a bit about, well, now we know what the tactics are, but how do we know who to call in for help and when? So one group of people that can be allies in this moment are platform companies. And manipulation campaigns thrive when timely, relevant, local, and redundant information is not available. The lack of authoritative information about a particular subject is exploited by manipulation campaign operators. And so it's really important to understand that platform companies are not necessarily out here looking for this. And so your role can be making sure that there is timely, local, relevant information out there, and that there's authoritative and accurate information that could be lifted up by and circulated by platform companies. And so make sure that you build those kinds of relationships with those companies so that your messaging can be elevated, even if it's not necessarily going viral, because people are, that's the one big conundrum here, is that things that are fake travel further and faster because they're completely outrageous and the truth is really boring. And so it's imperative that you start to build relationships with these companies if you need to, if your job is combating misinformation, because they have different systems they can employ to elevate your messaging. News media, repeating reliable information across multiple information channels, including TV and radio, will help reinforce the facts during a public health crisis. Redundant messaging, including sloganeering such as flatten the curve, is key. There's a reason why psychologically a lot of mimetic sloganing or slogans that are sticky contain 3 words. And so it's really important that not only do you have public health messaging that is clear and understood, but that it's also tied to a strategy of distribution that doesn't rely or over rely on certain channels like social media. So building up rapport with local reporters who want to provide this information is still very much key to combating the infodemic. While a lot of people do get their news and information online, they do still tend to trust local radio and television, local journalism. And so don't forget about that as a key vector of combating the infodemic. Third, public health. Use the fact fallacy fact communication strategy. That is, state the facts first, identify the false claim being debunked, then reiterate the facts again. And if you pair this with inoculation efforts where the logical fallacy supporting the misinformation is also explained, you can really have a definitive and clear sense of purpose in your messaging if you do follow these 2 strategies at once. Politicians and government. Misinformation on one platform will likely spread to others, especially if newsworthy individuals, including politicians, begin to share it. So it's important that you ask agencies to refrain from spreading rumors unless they are sure about their debunking strategy. And this goes back to public health professionals really being at the center and the fulcrum here of being the ones that should be explaining what's going on. But unfortunately, politicians in this moment have to govern through the pandemic. And some of them have veered into conspiracy theory or veered into anti-science thinking. And so it's really important that if you are fighting against political wins that are not in your favor, that you also think about, well, which part of it are you going to come for? Which part of the rumor is important that your messaging succeeds? And then civil society. Attempts to debunk misinformation should employ a multi-platform and coordinated messaging campaign where public susceptibility to medical misinformation is highest, and employ advertising tools to reach key demographics. keep in mind that civil society here has a lot of different mandates, but many of the folks that have been embroiled in getting people access to healthcare, access to treatment, these people are overwhelmingly going to be your allies in getting information out to counter medical misinformation. And so make sure that you have those relationships with people on the local level. And then lastly, I'm just going to go through a very quick example from our media manipulation casebook so you can see one of these campaigns in action. We went back and looked at how the Plandemic documentary was seeded into the information ecosystem. The word plandemic had been used amongst conspiracy theorists and others online for months ahead of the documentary or the film being released. And so the plandemic was a meme that was already circulating as a key word, where people were using it to claim that in this case that there was a deep state conspiracy to uproot Trump, and that the pandemic was the means by which the Democrats in the US were going to accomplish this. They knew that a documentary featuring an anti vaccination activist that made untrue claims about the efficacy of masks, they knew ahead of time that this was going to be removed by platform companies who had already been aggressively mitigating medical misinformation. And so we analyzed this case related to a tactic called distributed amplification. That is, how did they enroll a bunch of other people to distribute this documentary, knowing full well that platform companies were going to take action on it quickly and swiftly? And so we chart a bunch of different variables around, trying to understand who was doing it, where was it being taken out, where was the campaign circulating, who the target was, the scientific and medical community, what the vulnerability was. We're in the midst of an active crisis. How did mitigation strategies play in, like content removal, critical press, de-indexing, debunking? And then, what kind of adjustments played out. And one of the key things that we understand about this case and why we call it distributed amplification is because they told us what they were doing. This is a screenshot from one of their websites, which says, "Our videos are being taken down every minute. We appreciate your support. More coming soon. In an effort to bypass the gatekeepers of free speech, we invite you to download this interview by simply clicking the button below, then uploading directly to all of your favorite platforms." And so this led to this video essentially showing up thousands of more times on platforms than it would have if it was just one a strategic misinformer out there trying to make the media manipulation campaign happen. They actually brought in all of these other kinds of players and told them very bluntly what the strategy was going to be in order to manipulate platform companies' mitigation strategies. Ultimately, though, what happened is that platform companies learned that this strategy was in play. And then when the second video came out that was going to be much longer, fuller version of the documentary, it fell flat because platform companies were prepared for the tactic, and other people had, like myself and other researchers, and journalists as well, understood that it was coming and were able to brace for it, and were able to make sure that the second video wasn't as impactful as the first. However, the video does continue to show up online and in different ways. And one troubling adaptation has been that this video is starting to be translated, or is translated into multiple different languages. And so, in terms of a global case study, this video is starting to emerge as a key piece of medical misinformation that is starting to show up on not just different platforms, but in different languages. And we don't know exactly how platform companies intend on dealing with it in different countries. but we sure are taking a look for it. So I just want to close by saying thank you so much. We have both a set of articles and op-eds that you can take a look at, and the slides will be circulated to you. All of these are clickable links. And so you'll be able to see very quickly, what we know. And I'm hoping that through this webinar series that you feel a little bit more equipped and prepared for the road ahead. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.